Good morning, everybody. This is Carrie Guest with another edition of our podcast series. Today, we have a really cool guest on here. We have the marketing person for Mission Critical magazine, Amy Al-Katib, and she's going to talk to us about her journey, how she got into Mission Critical, and what she does on the marketing side, which is a little bit different from the technical side that we've normally been really focusing on this podcast. So, Amy, welcome. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, Carrie. Thanks so much for having me. Well, my background in Mission Critical is, I guess, approaching close to a year now, or right around exactly a year. I think I started August 1st of last year with the magazine. So my ultimate goal was always just to do something working as a journalist. And I didn't necessarily have a specific goal for that in mind. I didn't want to be an investigative journalist. I didn't want to be an environmental journalist. I just wanted to do journalism no matter what. So trade journalism was not even something that I thought of before I started going to college. I wasn't working in a trade, so there was really no reason for me to know of it. But I landed this job here, and I got to say it's a lot to learn. There is a lot of technical stuff, like you mentioned in your intro, but it has been so exciting so far. So I absolutely love it.
I will say that most people in Mission Critical, it didn't really start out with a plan to be in Mission Critical, mostly because the curriculum is relatively new in this industry as a whole. So a lot of people come in with degrees and different backgrounds, having done different things. So what did you do before you started at Mission Critical?
Well, I worked for another BNP magazine. So BNP Media is our parent company at Mission Critical. And I was working at ACHR News, which is an air conditioning, heating, and refrigeration news magazine. So I started out as the web editor. And really, it was so hard to get a job because when I graduated from college, we were in the middle of the recession, and a lot of people were losing their jobs. Very few places were hiring, and writers were really not wanted anywhere. So I got a job at a hotel just working at the front desk, and I was promoted a few times within that company. So I ended up kind of feeling like I had an unplanned career there. And so I thought about it often, and, this isn't what I wanted to do. I went to school for journalism, but I enjoyed my job there, and I felt like I was learning new things. So I stayed for a while, and eventually I just got to the point where I realized that it really was journalism that I wanted to be doing. So I actually quit my job without having another job.
Bold.
Yeah, I wouldn't say like don't do it, but I wouldn't recommend it. It just really depends on the situation. So for me, I knew that I didn't have the motivation to look for another job when I was working at the hotel. It was long hours at the hotel. It was a lot of physical work, so a lot of times I would come home and just be exhausted. And I just didn't have the motivation. It was the truth. So I quit, and I didn't have another job, and I was looking and looking and looking, and I thought I would find a job much quicker than I did. But it's kind of hard out there, and there's so many job postings when you're looking online, and there's so many different choices. So I was offered this job as web editor at the news, and I took it. And it wasn't something that sounded appealing to me when I took it. So my original plan was just to get some experience there and leave. That was my honest plan. I wanted to work there for a year or two. So I had some recent journalism experience, and I could go get what I thought was a better job. But I really fell in love with the company, and air conditioning and heating weren't really things that I had an interest in before, but I'm a nerd at heart. So when I was learning about the technology, it was kind of cool to me. So I ended up staying, and then this position opened up at Mission Critical, and it was offered to me, and I, saw it as a new opportunity to learn about a different industry and also to learn even more about journalism. So I took it, and it's been a really exciting time since I started. And before the pandemic, I got to do a lot of travel and go to a lot of different industry events. So I really got to, I think, experience a lot of the different sides of the industry and meet a lot of people. And now, obviously, that's died down a little bit, but I'm really looking forward to that aspect of it again.
I think everybody, not just in this industry, but everybody in a whole, is sort of looking forward to those times when we can start doing some more in-person meetings. There's a lot of Zoom fatigue out there, I think, with people that are just tired of being on cameras all the time. I think everybody's going to look forward to the in-person things. So as somebody from outside the industry, and obviously HVAC and air conditioning all are certainly a part of the data center industry, but what would you say are kind of some of your biggest surprises when you started going out and about and learning a bit more? What are some of the things that just really struck you as cool and really struck you as, oh wow, I had no idea?
Oh man. I think it's interesting to me, not just in the mission critical industry, but really when you get to learn any industry, I think just how there's an art to everything, to so many aspects of what goes into a data center. And so when you would think about it before, or at least from my perspective, it's, you think of just almost the shell of what everything is, right? Like what you see on the surface. Because as users of something or as outsiders, we don't get to see what goes on the inside. So I know one of the conferences that I went to was the Bixie, I think their winter conference in the beginning of this year was in Tampa. So there was a cabling challenge.
Right.
And, I think most people have used like tons of these cables, right? The terminated cables, and we use them to hook up all different kinds of things. And to me, they just come that way. Like that's how they're made. And I never thought anything of it, but I was watching these people in this competition, and they're so skilled. And like I said, they have an art to their work, and they have a style to the way that they do it. And, they can do it so fast and so gracefully still. So it's just, coming down to the littlest things like that. And then those all kind of come together in a way that blew my mind when I just took the CNET training certified data center design professional program, because I was thinking that you were going to be doing this sort of simple overview of a plan in that class. And then we were learning about electricity and stranded power and power factor and arc flash. And we were learning how to run cables and how to calculate, bend radius of different kind of cables to see what kind of material you need to put in. And so it's just all these very, very small pieces of a puzzle that come together where everyone involved has to be so educated and put so much care into what they're doing to make it come out as planned, that I think that is what I find the coolest about the data center industry. Everything that went into it. And I probably still don't. There's still a million things that I probably haven't heard of yet or haven't talked to anybody about. But from what I have, I think it's really cool.
Yeah, and it changes all the time. So about the time you think you have it figured out, there's a whole bunch of new stuff that comes along.
Yep.
So yeah, we've had actually CNET on the podcast before. Melissa Shamble, who's a good friend of mine, she's one of their instructors, and they do a really good job of kind of bringing all the pieces and parts together. And certifications are one of those areas that a lot of people don't realize how necessary they are because curriculum is so far behind where the industry is because it moves very, very slow. And a lot of people that come into this industry either come in from outside the industry or maybe they have a degree in coding, but they're not actually going to code in the mission critical space. They're going to do something different. And those certifications are a great way to get people's feet wet and help them understand the pieces and parts. And I think, as a journalist, it was probably a great thing that you did that just to get at least that immersion of all of the different pieces and parts.
I was so glad that I had the opportunity to do it just because it gave me a little bit, like I said, a little bit more of an understanding of what goes into that. And we talked about a lot of topics that I just feel are kind of not always the main focus of what you're learning about or what you're talking about, but they're somewhat in the background. And so there's a lot of terms that just get sort of, thrown around and buzzwords and stuff like this that I think it's easy to have an idea of what they are. But actually sitting down with somebody and discussing those specific terms or those specific technologies, it really helps you to wrap your mind around it. And so then in future conversations that I'm having, I know that I'm going to be more comfortable talking to people about the subjects that I learned about in that class. And I know that I'm going to have more to offer to the conversation. So yeah, I definitely think it's worth it. Really in any position, because as a journalist, I wouldn't say it's my responsibility to stay educated in the same way that it is for a technician. But the more education that you have, it's never going to hurt you. It's only going to help you. So I hop on every opportunity I have to learn something new, and whether it's, classes that you go to in person or online, or they're just workshops, there's a ton of great resources and information out there that you can always learn, or stuff that makes you come up with ideas on your own. Because, sometimes you're reading one person's theory on something and you read another person's and you kind of come up with your own idea based on disagreeing with both of them. So I definitely recommend it for everybody.
Yeah, this industry definitely has a lot of information out there. And because it is so multi layered and multifaceted, there's always an opportunity to learn something new and figure out different ways to do things. And I will say, too, as an industry, this is a very giving industry. People are really willing to share what's worked for them, what hasn't, through the whole networking and some of the other organizations that are out there. You really get to learn a lot and see a lot that's maybe parallel to what you're doing. And it is important, I think, to have all of those different inputs and thought processes because this industry does work to better itself on a continuous basis.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And as somebody new in the industry, I can definitely say that I do feel like it's a giving industry, and it's also very welcoming. So, you're one of the first people that I started having conversations with. Um, and I just, you were super helpful to me, never seemed judgmental. I had all the people who were on the technical advisory board, and that was kind of my go-to point, because I didn't know anyone in the industry. So I just reached out to all the members on the board, and everybody offered to help me. People offered to set up phone calls with me just to talk, like just to get to know me better and to find out if there was anything that they could do for me. So it hasn't been intimidating at all to go to events. I never feel stupid asking a question to anybody. And there's a lot of questions to be asked in this industry. So that's a really good feeling to feel comfortable going to anybody and asking. And I would say that I feel in the past year working in this industry that I've definitely made connections, and that seems to have happened faster than what I've seen working in other jobs, or having the the sort of like email relationship that we have these days, and not just because of COVID, but even before COVID, a lot of the people that I dealt with on a regular basis, our relationship was always just via email. So there are some people that you can actually turn that into a real relationship, and other people you just stay as people who you email. But with this job, like I said, so many of those contacts that I have for email purposes have actually turned into some sort of a relationship. And I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, I've got literally extended family all over the globe. That honestly is probably one of my favorite things about this industry is that people are so willing to help, and you just meet some really, really great people, and they just kind of stay in your life for a long time. Thankfully, we have lots and lots of ways to keep in touch with folks these days, which even 20 years ago, you couldn't say. So definitely a good thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of the focus of the magazine and where you guys are right now with COVID and all this stuff. Are you obviously, there's a digital brand of the magazine, but are there certain things that you plan on focusing on coming up that readers might be interested in, or what is the direction between now and say the end of the year?
Yeah, so we have quite a few new things that we're sort of experimenting with, I guess, just in terms of bringing me onto the brand, and me having fresh eyes on everything and not a lot of background in the industry. So I just have been kind of posing a lot of questions. I'm like, hey, what do you think about doing this? What do you think about doing that? So just over the course of the year, aside from the pandemic, we have made a few changes with the magazine. And so ultimately, our goal is just to provide the industry with the most useful information that we can. And so the way that we go about doing that is we take a look at the industry, we see what's going on, at events that are taking place, what trends are being discussed, and, what sort of popular technologies are coming out. And we'll try to focus on those points for a lot of the articles that we put out there, but we want to include everybody. So whether it's somebody who works on the IT side of things, whether it's somebody who's in new construction for data centers, the HVAC contractors that are working out there, people in cybersecurity writing the software programs. So we really want to have a holistic view of the entire industry. And we want to be able to reach everybody because, like I said, with the class that I took and, just kind of learning that it doesn't do the industry any good to have everybody in, separate silos here where like maybe we only focus on the power side, or we only focus on the cabling side, or we only focus on the HVAC, because it doesn't matter what sort of strategy you come up with in any of these parts, they have to be planned to work together. So even if somebody only works with HVAC, they still need to understand electricity, and they still need to understand the power draw and like the safety and all of this stuff. They still need to understand the IT equipment that's going into the data center, to know what they're cooling and to be able to make the floor plan work in the most optimal way. So they might be from separate parts of the industry, but they're not separate in terms of their contribution to the industry. So we like to bring them all together. Our goal is to offer the information that our readers want. So we're doing, a few different things to try to get in touch with our readers a little bit more now. One change that we made recently was we switched from a print magazine to digital only. So, we might lose some readers now because there are some people who prefer things in print, and And that's okay. We have, no judgments against them, but it's a reality. So we're also going to gain some new readers because the digital format is appealing to a lot of people, even though we had it before. Maybe they didn't know about it. So our audience is going to shift a little bit. And we're just kind of trying to gauge the way that shift goes. And we have a few exciting things planned that I probably shouldn't talk about yet. I didn't ask if I could, so I'm just going to say I won't. But contests are another thing that we've tried to incorporate. So we just ended our top tier product award contest, and this was the first year for that contest. The winners are going to be announced in the July and August issues. So that's something that the readers can look forward to, and we'll continue that as years go on. But we have a couple other contests that are in the works right now that we're planning on introducing. So that just kind of gets the readers engaged and, kind of gives everybody something to look forward to. So, we're just trying to keep up with the industry, keep up with what people are looking for. So we've added a podcast. We're trying to add more videos to our website as well. So just to have all the multimedia angles, because there are certain people who probably only watch videos to get their information, or certain people who only listen to podcasts. There's also people who only read to get their information. So we want to put our eggs in all of those baskets, so to speak, and just kind of help our contributors who are providing great content for us reach as many people in the industry as they possibly can.
Yeah, I think you bring up several good points. I have for years argued that the data center is an ecosystem, and it's unfortunate over the past as budgets were separated into different departments that silos became really important. And I kind of have always preached that you have to know what the other silos are doing, or you're not effective in your job and making the data center run as a whole, because everything is very, very much intertwined. To your point, I mean, there's no way that just the server team can figure out the entire data center, or just the facilities team, because they have to work together. And it's unfortunate, I did ran an Afghan Leaders Lab year before last, and that came up multiple times, in that the departments just don't talk to each other. They come up, with a different guess, and that's where a lot of the stranded power comes from, and a lot of the problems come from, because people aren't really doing that triage of what really happens in their data center. Some of the larger companies for sure do that, but you'd be surprised. There were some large companies in the room that said, "No, we absolutely don't do that." So it is nice to see that there is a focus on really bringing all of those pieces and parts together.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it makes it a little bit more challenging to I guess, sort of reach when you don't have a specific targeted audience, because it depends on, how broad you want to be, right? Because we do have a targeted audience. There are people who work in the mission critical industry. But like I said, we're not only targeting the ones who work on HVAC or the ones who work on cybersecurity. So when you don't have a narrow focus like that, it's sometimes harder to get that reach, because, then you'll have people coming and it's like, oh, I don't care about this part. I only want to read cybersecurity. I don't want to read about electricity. I want to read about safety. I only want to know about software. So we kind of have to just sort of keep that in mind in making sure that everything is always, a little bit balanced. So we have multiple topics in every issue of the magazine. If you go back through past issues, or if you look at future ones, so one might be the cooling issue, but every article in that magazine is not going to be on cooling. There's going to be cybersecurity in there. There's training and education. So we just try to have something for everyone in what we put out. And that's included with, the kind of materials that we're publishing on our website, which has also taken off there too. So we've made changes to the website as well. And we do have a new redesign coming up that I am allowed to talk about. I don't have specifics, but just aesthetically speaking, we'll be redesigning the way that the website looks. And I saw a preview of it from one of our other brands, and it's really nice. I'm so excited for it because I'm a big person on aesthetics. I like to like the way things look. So, I think it's also a little bit more user friendly, and we've added some topics to our navigation bar as well for some things that are gaining popularity, like 5G and edge computing. So just like the industry is always changing, we're always changing at the magazine, and we kind of try to see if something doesn't work. We're never really married to the idea, so we might start something and then stop it if we gave it enough time and it didn't take off. And it's kind of a trial and error sort of thing when it comes to journalism because it's so subjective. But we seem to be having a really good response so far from our readers, and I'm looking forward to more of it. And I think the new website and some of the other new plans that we have when they're announced will really take off.
Yeah, that's really great. And I mean, this industry as a whole reinvents itself pretty much once a year, twice a year, because there's a new technology or a new something that goes out. So there's certainly never any shortage of things to talk about and things that are happening as a whole, whether it's, in a certain department or across the data center as a whole. So what would you say, over the last, I don't know, year, the coolest technology that you've heard about?
I've heard about a lot. I have to think about that one.
Yeah, I think for me, it's software defined power. That to me is probably the most amazing technology because it really marries the IT and the facilities together, which is a giant wedge that's been in this industry for way, way, way too long. I keynoted at 7x24 not long ago. Well, actually, maybe 2 years ago, so maybe it was a while ago. But, I told everybody in the room, and a lot of those were facilities engineers, that they really needed to pay attention to the IT kit because we're building out things that are way too redundant. And if you have an application that's distributed across 5 data centers with failover, all of those don't need to be redundant connections for everything because you're just building in a layer of redundancy that's already taken care of in the IT load. And so I think we're going to see some more focus on those things, especially with the amount of stranded power that's in the industry. And I think probably on top of that would be sustainability, just because data centers tend to be such giant power consumers. But, it's always nice to hear what other people think, see out there and think is really cool.
Yeah, so I just had an article about software defined power, and I did find that very interesting. Another thing that I think is pretty cool, if I had to pick one, I'd say is the virtual servers. And I just feel that working in the hotels before, we had, very small little like data closet in the hotel because I worked at a limited service hotel, didn't have that many rooms. So I guess I had a little bit of data center experience before I started at the magazine, but it was very minimal. And we had a lot of equipment that, you really never had to use. It was important when you needed to use it. It was very important when you needed it. But the amount of times that you needed it were so few. So this idea of virtual servers, I think, could really help out, a lot of places in terms of just space constraints, because that was the thing that bothered me about our data closet was it was so messy, I felt like, and you just couldn't, you couldn't move this big equipment that we really never needed. And it's like I was just always thinking about how it would be so much better if I could get rid of this one thing or I could move that there. But yeah, so then if you didn't have to have all of this equipment that you only used for, 10 minutes out of the day or 1 hour out of the week, and you can have it all on a virtual server that's sort of rotating its space as applications call for it. I think that is a really cool idea.
Yeah, they've done a really great job with that technology over the years. It's certainly helped a lot of data centers that thought they were going to be at capacity 15 years ago not be at capacity, and freed up a lot of capacity for other applications and other things within the data center. So that's definitely a cool technology. So if you went back to things that you learned in school or on other jobs that you think really, really helped you in this industry? Because, like I said, there's a lot of people that are coming into this industry from outside, like you, where it's all brand new and it's all kind of shiny and sparkly and intimidating. What are some things that you brought with you along the way from outside the industry that have helped you inside the industry?
And so in my past, I worked in retail for a long time. I was in retail for 7 years working at Blockbuster, if you remember that place. So,
Yeah,
um,
I'm actually surprised you're old enough to have worked at Blockbuster because you very much don't look like it.
yeah, 7 years I spent there. So all throughout college, I worked there, and I started in high school. So I worked there, and then I was in hospitality immediately after I got out of college. So those jobs both helped me in just communicating with people. So it was never a very big issue for me. I'm not a very shy person, although I used to be when I was a kid, but I'm not shy. I don't worry about, what people, if people are going to judge a question that I have, or, something like that. I don't really worry about it. But I'd say that I got that way because of all of the interactions that I had with strangers working in retail and hospitality. So there were a lot of times that when people are comfortable with a subject, they talk to everybody as if everybody knows what they're talking about. I noticed a lot of the time. There are other people on the other end of the spectrum that are very comfortable with a subject and they think nobody else knows anything about it. So they'll explain every single detail. And then on the other side, you have the people who explain nothing. So people were coming to the hotel from all different industries for business trips, and they would talk to me about what they were doing there. And, a lot of them just acted like I knew what they were talking about, and I didn't. But I would ask them because I also didn't feel stupid asking them. So I think it got me comfortable in that way. And it also built a curiosity for me because I was learning about things that I didn't even know were a job before. So when people were coming and telling me what they were here for, it's like, oh, I didn't even really realize that that was something that people do. When you think about it, it makes sense. But like I said before, when you're just looking at the surface of everything and you can't be involved on the inside of everything that's going on in the world, you have this sort of, I don't know, myopic view of it, and you miss a lot of stuff. So that definitely helped there. And then, the little bit of experience that I did have in working with the data centers that were on site at our hotels made some of the jargon made sense to me when I started at Mission Critical. A lot of it came back. I already knew what a UPS was because I remember being in the hotel one day and being like, "What is that beeping noise? Like, why don't this beeping stop?" And I finally found this little black box. And then when I asked what it was, someone said it's a UPS. You have to go replace it. So I knew what the purpose of that was. I knew a little bit about cabling and, you know, servers and racks and cabinets and temperature control and different stuff like this, but it wasn't very specific. But that's because I wasn't, 100% involved in the build. But I'm a curious person. So when we were building new hotels, I did ask a lot of questions. I was around for a lot of the work. I did a lot of the physical stuff. Um, And I was always managing the hotel. So always fell on my shoulders to troubleshoot and fix the problems. And there were always problems every time. The internet never worked, when you opened a new hotel or stuff like this. So we would have to sit through and sort of troubleshoot. And by troubleshooting with the techs, you just absorb some information. So I think that gave me a little bit of confidence when I came in. It's something that I felt a little bit, I don't know if confident is actually the right word, but for lack of a better word, I'll say confident. When I went to my interview for ACHR News, because it was heating and air conditioning. And so same thing, I felt like from the hotel, I had a little bit of experience working with heating and air conditioning because we had the PTAC units. And, it's just when you're there and it's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the maintenance guy isn't always there. So sometimes you just step in and try to fix things, or you're on the phone with the maintenance guy and they're telling you what to do. So I did say in my interview, I don't know a lot about the way it works, but I've dealt with some HVAC units, and that's about the extent of my knowledge. But I do feel like it gave me a little bit of knowledge in the data center industry as well. And from the financial side too. So because when you're working in retail or you're working in hospitality or anywhere where you have transactions with customers, I'd say when it comes to like the fintech side of the industry, there's probably a lot of stuff that I've dealt with the credit card companies or the merchant processors that has made me understand why their sort of data is different and is treated differently than a lot of other data.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think people forget how many parallel experiences there are and how a lot of that stuff is relatable. That's why this is such a fun question, because your experience translated into other experiences, and women in the industry, and just women as a whole, I think we really have a lot of parallel things, from running a household to being a project manager. There's a lot of very parallel things. I'm a military liaison outreach for infrastructure masons. And we tell people coming out of the military, look, we'll get you trained, we'll get you a job as you come back to civilian life. But there's a ton of what happens in the military that is so procedural that translates exceptionally well to data center operations, because it's all procedure driven. And that's really what you want when you're looking at operations. You want somebody that's going to follow the procedures, go check on the equipment, look for alarms, be able to monitor and formulate thoughts in a hurry, because it is mission critical. So a lot of times you don't have that luxury of sitting around and trying to triage things. You have to do something right now and make a decision, good or bad, right? So I think it's important, to kind of focus on parallel skills and things that you bring to the table, and not be afraid to say, look, I don't have a ton of experience here, but I have worked with this. I at least know what it is. And to your other point, not being afraid to ask a question. To me, the only stupid question is one that doesn't get asked. But a lot of people are afraid to ask questions because we're all ignorant till we know, but people don't want to show that they're ignorant until they know. And so they kind of stumble through things. And that's one thing I will say in this industry, is that there's no shortage of people that will definitely help you over those hurdles. And if you ask the wrong person and they don't help you, go ask somebody else, because I can guarantee you can find somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the flip side of what you're saying, where you're kind of looking at just things that we've experienced in regular life and how that translates to the data center. But sort of like what you're saying with veterans, if they're in the service and they have this sort of mentality and this way of thinking, and then that translates well into the data center. But also people who are working in the mission critical industry and are working in the data center, I think that a lot of what they're experiencing inside of the data center can translate to experiences that we have outside, where they can, maybe have a better understanding of the way things work outside of the data center, or they can share information about why things in the data center are important. Because as a consumer or just a regular person before I worked at Mission Critical, there's not a lot of things that were explained to me, like to make sense. Things are told to you. So when I worked in the hotel, I was told that I had to keep our PBX room at a certain temperature. Nobody ever explained to me why. Like that equipment is producing heat. That's not that hard to understand. Why couldn't somebody say that to me? And it might seem like common sense, but it's not. So if you're just always thinking that people know things and understand things, then you're missing out on opportunities to educate them and maybe educate yourself, because sometimes when you share information with someone, they'll come back and, share information with you. But I've had experiences that were mission critical, that just, they aren't explained to you. And so the general public is never really going to understand. And just one sort of example of that relates a little bit to what we're going on right now is, a few years ago when we had the swine flu outbreak. And I was very close to somebody who had it, and he was on a swine flu floor at U of M hospital, and they were on these machines called oscillators. It's like a step up from a ventilator. So it pumps like 700 breaths a minute into people. Like it's like a ventilator on steroids, I guess. So, but they said, at U of M has the most of them in the country. They said most hospitals don't even have one. And the reason why is because if they have one, they have to have two. Because if someone's on it, their life depends on it. So they have to have a backup in case something happens to that. So this is just an idea of redundancy. But it didn't make sense to me. Like, why does one hospital have a machine that can save someone's life that they're just deciding not to use? Like that seems really bad to a person who doesn't understand the importance of having redundancy built into your procedure, so it seems like everybody's always in such a hurry, or because they know that it makes sense and they know that they're right. They don't really care what you think. And it's not worth it for people a lot of times to just explain the way that things work to other people. So I would say, I think that's what people in the industry should be doing, is like anytime that there is a chance in regular life where you have an example of something that represents the way that we do things in the mission critical industry, then it should be shared with the people that you're experiencing that with, so that we all have a better understanding of like the world around us, right? Like it's always cool when you learn something new. And it's like kids, right? When they go to school, they come home and they want to teach you what they learned in school. When people learn something, it's exciting and they want to share it. But for some reason, when it's your job, it just becomes annoying or, not worth the time. So in the middle of, the labor shortage and like the acceleration of data centers as we're going through this pandemic, I would say like people should just be sharing stories with people who they don't even think are going to be interested in what they have to say, because it's surprising to find out who finds certain things interesting. And it could lead people down, a million different sort of rabbit holes, any kind of little information that you share about the data center, because I guarantee most people are going to be like, oh, really? I didn't know that. And then they're going to be interested and they're going to look into it more. And it might, bring people to the industry, whether it's teenagers who are just graduating from high school and they're deciding to go get their post high school education in a college or do an apprenticeship or whatever program they might take. Or it could be people like me who were in their early 30s and just decided to quit their job one day without another job because all they know is they weren't happy doing what they were doing anymore and they want to do something else. So there's a lot of people who switch careers in their 30s or 40s, and you don't think of them as possible recruits, or you don't think of them as a group of people that has a lot of potential to sort of bridge that gap in the labor. But a lot of times those are the best people, because they've dealt with stupid jobs already for 20 years. They have kids to raise. They're missing out on stuff by working nights and weekends. And they want to be around for their kids more. Whatever it is, people switch careers when they're older, even though it doesn't seem likely. And I think it's really a lot about these random experiences that you can have with people, where you share moments and you share information that enlightens people and makes them excited about it and want to learn more.
Yeah, I mean, this whole industry as a whole really has suffered from lack of exposure, because years ago, people wanted to hide their data center. They wanted it to be this nondescript, ugly building in the middle of nowhere that looked like a warehouse and nobody could know what was in it. And then when colo became an industry, they started advertising, obviously, because there was open space. But it is kind of a sleeper industry. It's kind of the hidden industry. People just expect their email to be there. They expect their web to work. They expect certain things, but they don't really understand the technology behind it. And you bring up a good point in that, anybody in this industry really needs to evangelize this industry so that other people know. We've had some diversity and inclusion experts and some folks talking about early childhood education and just the lack of talent in this industry as a whole. And I think HR really has a play there too, in that we're going to need more HR people that are technology skilled, so that they can figure out, what translates and makes somebody important or makes somebody a good candidate for something if they're coming from outside of the industry. And it's a special person that can do that. I know some folks at Google that have come from outside the industry, and they've done a pretty good job of it. But there is a massive talent shortage in this industry as a whole, and people have proven that they can work remotely. There's a lot of things we can do to help fill those holes, but HR really, I think, needs to step up to the plate and change the way they do things so that they're looking at those parallel skills and things that translate well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that just kind of goes back to this notion that you and I were both talking about, where we were saying that it is everything that is an ecosystem. And it doesn't matter if you work in human resources. You shouldn't just know things about hiring rules and stuff like that. If you work at human resources at a hospital, then you should know some things about that hospital. If you work in human resources at a hotel, you should. Nothing bothers me more than when I go to a place and I ask someone a question, they're like, "Oh, I'm just the blah, blah, blah." And it's like, well, no, you're an employee here. That's what you are. And I'm asking you a question about the place, and it's fine to not know the answer, but the right response is, let me go find out for you. It's not my job to know that, so does it take a little bit more effort from people to learn a little bit about the other departments at their place of employment? Probably. But do we all have a ton of downtime while we're sitting at work? I think so, a lot of the times, so instead of doing our personal things during that downtime we have at work, we can just, have a 10 or 15-minute conversation with another department, and you can learn a lot, or you can have reference materials to look at, or, there's so many different things. But for an HR person to be able to tell if someone could benefit the data center, they wouldn't have to know, so many specifics about how the IT equipment is installed and how it's put together. It's really just basic human questions that you could ask them. So it doesn't require a lot of extra effort. And I think that's something that we just really need to work on, not only in the mission critical industry. I think it's a problem with the people. I think people, because I hear it from people all the time, that's not my job. And to me, I've never had that attitude at a place that I worked, because if there's something that needs to be done there and I happen to be there, then that becomes my job, so you should always be working for like the betterment of the place that you work at. And if you don't want that place to succeed, you shouldn't work there.
Yeah.
So, so I mean, I think that these are pretty basic things, but unfortunately, you're right. And we don't have that sort of support from the HR departments in most industries, I think. And yeah, it's just going to take some time because the data center industry is still sort of new and emerging. And so the fact that there's a labor shortage, it's just like anything else. You have to go through some painful moments where you realize like, oh, we actually do have to do something to start recruiting more people because we really don't have enough people for our industry. So nobody does anything right away. You have to kind of see the impact before you realize that it's serious and that you need to do something. But, I think slowly over time, people will make these little changes. And as unfortunate as the pandemic has been, it has brought a lot of attention to data centers. So, just that in and of itself should help to spark a little bit of interest for people.
Sure, sure. Well, we're getting about close to the end of our time. So if you wanted to leave some of those listeners with some parting words about, joining the industry, being in the industry, your path to the industry, what you're looking forward to, what words of wisdom would you leave with?
Yeah, I mean, I think just for anybody listening, whether you're, a teenager trying to think about what you're going to do for the rest of your life, or you're somebody who's already in this industry, but maybe feeling like you might want to go somewhere else, or you might want to have a bigger impact on the industry, whatever it is, if you work in another industry, I think the important thing is to just not think about all the things that could go wrong, which for people in our industry is a little bit backwards. When you're when you're in the data center, you're kind of always trying to think of every little thing that could go wrong and having this sort of plan to minimize the risks or avoid them completely. But that's necessary, I think, in that type of environment. But in terms of just living your life, I think worrying about what might go wrong is something that I see a lot of people do. And almost always, they never point out what could go right. So both are up in the air. And I had a little bit of this battle in my mind before I took this job too, because I worked at the news. That magazine has been around for 100 years. I felt like I had job security there. I felt like, I don't know anything about this mission critical magazine. Like, what if it's not successful? And what if I move over there and then the magazine fails and I end up losing my job? And, all of those things could have happened. And then all of a sudden I was sitting there and I was like, just because the news has been around for 100 years doesn't mean my job there is guaranteed. I could quit. I could get fired. They could sell that magazine. So I thought, this is new. It sounds exciting to me. Let me try it. And I was really surprised by how interested I am in it. So if I would have given in to my fear, I would still be working at the news. And I would probably be annoyed with myself right now because somebody else would be in my position at Mission Critical. And I'd be thinking, I didn't take that job because I was nervous that we might not need a data center magazine in the future. And look at the data center industry now, so I would have been annoyed with myself. And instead, I'm super happy with my decision. And even if I wasn't, worst case scenario, if you make a leap and you try to do something, you don't have to stay there. Like, you can always change your mind later and go back to what you were doing or go do something else. And you can be successful in all the things that you do. It doesn't have to be that you pick one thing while you were in high school, you go to college for it, and you do that for the rest of your life. And that's the only way that you're successful. So also don't listen to what other people think. But, that's just my opinion. But
Unless something good.
I think we take other people's opinions, way too much into account. So yeah, listen to what I say, but don't make your plans based on that.
Sure. Well, Amy, I absolutely want to thank you for your time today. I invite everybody to check out Mission Critical. It is a great publication, not just because I write for them sometimes, just because it's a great publication in the industry. And for the rest of you listening, we look forward to hosting you on another edition of the podcast series. Thanks for tuning in.